second version of this fabric, which is a little darker and it has got fruits and vegetables on it. I am actually planning to have a little series on my channel where I turn all of these vintage fabrics into clothing. And here it is, episode 2 of me turning the hideous vintage fabrics that I got from my mum into clothing. So first of all, let's have a look at this fabric. It's super fruity and hideous, and if you jump heavy enough it might turn into a cute playsuit, but in reality we will have to get sewing, so excuse that little dad joke. Now if you are a bit of an idiot like me, you will try and make this a seamless playsuit where you don't have a front or back seam. It's basically exactly like in the reference picture. In reality that doesn't work, because with the fabric that I had and with the skills that I had and everything, it's just extremely difficult. So you can see me cut my patterns here and butcher the fabric to a point where it was really difficult to make anything out of this fabric. But I shortly and quickly realized this was not going to go well, so this is how you'd actually do it. First of all, you want to trace a t-shirt. You want to trace the front and back piece of the t-shirt as well as the sleeves. Make sure this is a t-shirt that suits you well and that you really like the fit of, and that is somewhat figure hugging. Next step, you would then be taking either some reference shorts or some patterns that you have for bottoms and trace them on top of the t-shirt tracing. Just make sure that the front seams match up. This is what the patterns should like cut. Now if you're like, girl, go back to that pattern part, I did not get it, that is for a good reason, because I have got a hidden agenda. This hidden agenda being that this pattern is actually now available for purchase on my Etsy shop. So after drafting this pattern for myself, I got it created by a fashion designer, which enabled me to list my first ever item on my Etsy shop. So if you want to sew this playsuit with the same pattern as me, feel free to head over to my Etsy shop and purchase the pattern for a very reasonable price over there. And then you go ahead and sew them together up until this middle point where the cleavage starts. You can sew the back piece together entirely, and you can then go ahead and close the shoulder seams. And then of course we fit in the sleeves in the next step, and then once that's done we can fold our piece in half and close up the side seams. For that we're just wiggling the garment around a little bit, and we go ahead and close the entire sleeves and side seams all the way down. Next we then have to close the bottom, so we basically close the crotch seam. You fold that in half and just sew along the entire crotch area. That's then the time when we first have to try it on. Now you can see this looks horrendous, so we have to shorten the legs a little bit and I have to take in the sides. I'm not just taking in the sides, I'm also taking in the back a little bit, because overall this is just not fitting my body very well. I've got quite an arched back, and that's why I have to take a lot of fabric in from the back. You could also just totally leave it to fit you a little more baggy. That's completely up to your personal preference, but I wanted mine to be a little bit figure hugging. I'm also just deciding how short I want the shorts to be, and then I go ahead and take in my side seams and the back, and I'm just basting that down to have the chance to readjust it if I've taken in too much or too little. So I'm basically just pinning that to myself and then basting it with my normal sewing machine. This is basically like sewing dots. And then we are on to the next fitting, and that fits me really well. I'm very happy, as you can see. So now I can overlock those dots and basically cut off that excess fabric. And then lastly, I'm just removing the basting stitch so that the garment is nice and clean from the inside as well. And then I'm just shortening the leg, but I then later realized that it's best to actually wear the playsuit and pin the front and back as how I want it, because I want it to be a little longer in the back than in the front, so just cutting it straight is not good enough. So then I just pinned it to my liking and then cut it along those pins, basically, as you can see here. In the next step, we're then gonna measure the circumference of our leg openings, and we are gonna do the same with our sleeve openings, basically any opening of the playsuit that we want to finish with bias binding. So I'm just measuring all around that leg, okay, and I'm measuring all around the sleeve. You will need a measure tape for that in the best case scenario, because they are more flexible, of course. And then you want to memorize or write down those measurements so that you can go and create and cut the bias binding. For the bias binding, I'm using these pink old leggings. I'm cutting them apart, and then I go ahead and I am creating my bias binding. I made my bias binding 5 centimeters wide, which I thought was plenty, and then of course the length is whatever measurement we had. To make it into bias binding, I'm of course ironing it so that the raw edges are faced inside and that they are folded in half, just so that it's ready to be stitched onto the playsuit. And here are all my beautiful bias strips, and then all that is left to do really is to be taking them to our garment, and then we're just folding it all around our raw edges. So we're basically encasing our raw edges with the bias binding and then pinning that to the sleeves and the leg openings, so we can then take it to the sewing machine and top stitch that down. Now usually bias binding is attached from the inside, right sides together, and then you top stitch it from the outside. I personally find that this is a little time consuming, and I try to cut corners wherever possible, so this is what I do here. And then lastly, when we finish off the bias binding, we're just folding in the raw edges so that all the raw edges are inside, and then we pin that to the sleeve and legs, and then we can take it to the sewing machine and top stitch this entire thing. You want to make sure that you take your time for this to make sure you catch the fabric from below and that it's looking nice and neat from the top. This is stretchy fabric, so you might also find that it wants to stretch out a little bit whilst sewing. Make sure that you don't stretch it out, because otherwise you stretch out your hems. And then this is what it looks like when it's all finished, and it should hopefully remain a little stretchy, but even if it doesn't, it shouldn't be too bad. The next step then is to measure the opening that we left for our cleavage. So you can see here I'm measuring it, it's 28 centimeters. Cool. And then I'm just basically doing the exact same thing again, where I am cutting some bias binding. This time, however, I made it 1 centimeter wider, so we're talking about 6 centimeters now. And I'm making it, of course, the length that is my cleavage opening, and then plus 1 or 2 centimeters seam allowance. I'm pressing this entire thing again. I am making it a little wider this time, so I'm not folding it in half and then folding the raw edges into the very edge. I'm making sure that I have a little more fabric left. And then of course I'm also ironing in the raw edges because I don't want them showing on my garment. So I'm just ironing those in and then pressing that whole thing shut again. And then we do the exact same thing again, where we are just pinning our bias to the opening. I'm just making sure that there is enough fabric sticking out so that those two can overlap easily. Pin it all down and then top stitch this entire thing shut, and then also overlay the 2 openings at the bottom slightly and sew across there as well. You want to again make sure you take your time for this so that you catch all of the fabric from underneath, and then when you're done it should look something like this, where you have got a really nice shirt-like opening for your playsuit. I then also just stitched this square that you can see there to make it all snug and fit well. And then the last thing we need to do is create the collar. So for that I'm just measuring the neckline to see how long my collar needs to be. Mine was about 40 centimeters. Because I was restricted with the fabric, I split it in 2 parts, so 2 times 20 centimeters, and I just made this triangular sort of shape, and then sew that all together, right sides together, turn it right side out, and then we already have our collar that this time I'm gonna attach to the playsuit in the correct way. So I'm starting from the inside, sewing it right sides together from the inside, and then just stitching that down for a start. I'm just making sure that my seams align, so where I cut the collar in 2 parts, I'm attaching that to the back seam of my playsuit, and then just stitch that down completely. I'm using about 1 centimeter seam allowance here, but you do you. And then you can see here what that looks like. The next step now is to just take the remainder of the collar, so the outer edge, and then fold the raw edges in and pin that to the outer edge of the playsuit. Again, taking my time for that to make sure the seams align and that it's not stretched out anywhere or anything like that. Top stitching it down, and then we are pretty much done with the entire playsuit. All of the raw edges are hidden from the inside and the outside. And this is now good to be worn to your new favorite festival, the beach, on a summer holiday, wherever you want to wear it. And here is the final outcome. I know it's kind of toddler-esque, but personally, I absolutely love this. I was gobsmacked by the results. I was so happy with how it turned out. I think it's a super cute style. You can wear it to a festival, you can wear it to the beach, you can wear it on a holiday, you can wear it around the house to lounge around in. I just think it's a super flattering fit. I personally feel super comfortable in it. I love the hideous fabric. I love it together with the pink, and I love it in this style and design. So I'm personally extremely happy, and if you do want to try it out yourself as well, I highly recommend that.